The Nintendo Switch Lite came out a month ago, and I've been living with one and commuting with one ever since. I thought this was going to change the way that I play Nintendo games, but I think I would recommend the original Switch instead. Here's why. Now, the Switch Lite has kind of ruined my perception for which Switch I prefer, because the Switch Lite is the one that I'd rather play on. Now, if that sounds confusing compared to what I just said, let me explain that the Switch Lite feels better, it's more portable, it's less expensive, and for carrying it on the train and bringing it into work, I love that. There's only one problem. It doesn't connect to a TV, and that means that it's not multiplayer. And because I have kids, that means that they're not going to be able to play multiplayer games easily with me, which makes the Switch Lite a personal little selfish game device. My kids can't play it because I'm taking it in to work with me. So what do they play? Well, you could always get a second Switch, which is what some people do. But then if you have the other Switch at home, like the original one is, docked in front of the TV, how do you share games on it? That is the Switch problem. If you've ever had two Switches and you've tried to explore this, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, let me explain. The Nintendo Switch, if you're using game cards, will be just fine. You could put a Switch game card into either Switch or any Switch and enjoy it wherever you want. If you happen to have digital games, and why wouldn't you, because it's easy to download them and often they're on sale, they're going to be tied to one particular Nintendo account. In which case, that Nintendo account is the only one that can play them. Now, if you have one Switch, you could have multiple accounts playing those games that you bought. But if you have two Switches, you're going to have to make one the main Switch and the other one a non-primary Switch, which means it can play those games only if it goes online to check that it can play the game, which means it's a Wi-Fi only Switch, which means that's not going out with you on the road. It means it's going to stay docked at home, and if you have Wi-Fi and you're going to play games that way, sure, that's a second Switch you can play on, but it removes any of the portability. Now, what happens if you decide to switch those Switches? What if you decide to take the one that's at home on the road and leave the one that I'm taking with me and leave it at home? Well, then you have to go online and you have to redesignate which Switch is the primary Switch. Also, you have to deal with transferring game saves. Now, you could do that from Switch to Switch within settings, or you could download your game saves if you have cloud save enabled, if you have a Nintendo online account. That doesn't happen necessarily automatically. In fact, I've been playing games between both Switches, and it turns out that if you play one game on one Switch, you have to make sure that it's saved and uploaded, and then you have to check the other Switch to make sure that that new save data can be downloaded to the other Switch, so you're ping-ponging back and forth. This doesn't sound very fun, does it? No, it's not. And that's what it's like to play between two Switches. It's a lot different than, say, having an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device where you're used to having multiple devices, you log on, you can download the apps, you can play on multiple devices, no problem. The Switch and Nintendo should consider that model, but until it does, you're not going to be able to play the Switch Lite and the Switch in that same easy way. And the other thing I miss about the original Switch is not just the multiplayer, but all the other types of games you can play on it. Now, you're not necessarily going to buy Nintendo Labo, but if you happen to do that, you might want to play around with those weird folding cardboard things. You can only do that with the original Switch. Same thing with Ring Fit Adventure, which is Nintendo's first fitness game for the Switch. You could connect it with external controllers and play on this little screen, but it's really meant to be played on a big TV, which means you'd want to use that with an original Switch. I mean, frankly, between that and the fact that the original Switch now has a longer battery life if you can find that particular model in stores, I would recommend paying up for that one. I have no idea what the perfect Switch is anymore. I would love if the Lite had video out and had the ability to detach its controllers, which would basically make it a regular Switch but smaller, but that thing doesn't exist. Please, Nintendo, just find some way to fix the online game sharing so that you could play multiple downloaded games on multiple Switches, so I wouldn't have to decide which switch to pick and which one to assign at home as the primary or secondary switch. If that were fixed, I would find the Switch Lite to be a lot more recommendable. If I were to pick just one Switch for you to live with, go with the original Switch. But if you had a second choice, you go with the Switch Lite if they fix the downloading. But then I'd like to connect to the TV. And if I connect to the TV, then that would be more like the original Switch.